When The Departed arrived in 2006, audiences saw guns and accents. They saw betrayal stacked like bodies in Boston alleys. They saw Martin Scorsese returning to crime, to violence, to men destroying each other for power they'd never actually hold. But underneath the chaos lived something quieter and far more suffocating. A film about identity surveillance, about men performing roles until performance becomes prison, about a city where everyone watches and no one sees. The truth wasn't hidden in the shootouts. These are 19 hidden details you completely missed in The Departed. Number 1. The film opens with a lie. Frank Costello's opening monologue frames himself as a self-made survivor, a man who clawed his way up from South Boston streets through cunning and ruthlessness. But nearly everything he says is contradicted by what the film later reveals. The speech establishes him as mythology, not truth, a character who rewrites his own history with every telling. Martin Scorsese instructed Jack Nicholson to deliver the lines with the same absolute conviction he'd brought to Chinatown decades earlier, making the audience believe Costello's version of himself before reality slowly dismantles it scene by scene. The opening warns viewers not to trust the narrator, a technique stretching back to film noir classics like Double Indemnity. Costello controls the story before he controls anything else. The lie establishes dominance before the first act even begins. Number 2. Frank Costello is always shot from below. Cinematographer Michael Ballhaus, who had shot Scorsese's Goodfellas and worked with Rainer Werner Fassbinder in 1970s German cinema, deliberately framed Costello using low camera angles throughout the film, making him loom over scenes even when other characters hold positional authority. The technique visually reinforces Costello's invasive presence, his ability to dominate space without occupying official power structures. Scorsese wanted Costello to feel unavoidable, borrowing the visual language Orson Welles used in Touch of Evil. The low angles weren't about respect or admiration, they were about threat, about a man who occupies psychological territory rather than physical ground. Even when Costello sits, the camera positions him as towering, inescapable, omnipresent. Power in The Departed isn't about position, it's about presence, and the framing never lets that presence recede into background. Number 3. Billy is introduced through surveillance. The audience doesn't meet Billy Costigan as a person first, they meet him as a file, a collection of police reports, psychological evaluations, and background checks that define him before he speaks a single line. Scorsese structured the introduction to strip Billy of agency from the beginning, mirroring the surveillance state anxieties that defined post 9/11 America. Billy exists under constant observation, his life monitored, recorded, and analyzed by people who never truly see him. Leonardo DiCaprio said the introduction shaped his entire performance. Understanding that Billy was a subject rather than a protagonist, the film refuses to let Billy own his own story, functioning like the intimate paranoia Francis Ford Coppola explored in The Conversation. His narrative is always filtered through someone else's lens. Number 4. Colin is introduced through privilege. Colin Sullivan's first scenes are clean, quiet, and controlled, framed in classrooms, offices, and institutional spaces where authority feels natural rather than earned. Production designer Christy Zaya, who had designed the oppressive corporate environments in C7, deliberately designed Colin's environments to feel structured and safe, visually separating him from the chaos that surrounds Billy's introduction. The privilege isn't loud or obvious, it's architectural, environmental, embedded in the settings themselves. Scorsese wanted the contrast between Billy and Colin to register subconsciously, using the clean aesthetic of corporate power that defined Wall Street-era cinema. Colin's corruption hides behind structure, behind legitimacy, behind the visual language of institutional approval. The film shows that the most dangerous lies are the ones told in clean offices with proper lighting. Number 5. Every death occurs after a missed call. Almost every major death in the film is preceded by a missed call, an intercepted message, or a communication failure that arrives too late to prevent violence. Scorsese and editor Thelma Schoonmaker, who had cut every Scorsese film since Raging Bull in 1980, structured the film's deaths around technological breakdown, showing that information moves faster than loyalty. The missed calls aren't just plot devices, they're thematic statements about a world where everyone communicates but no one connects, reflecting the Nokia and Motorola flip phone era when cellular communication was becoming ubiquitous but still unreliable. Billy dies because information arrives after decisions are already made. Costello dies because he trusts technology over instinct. Technology doesn't save anyone, it just documents their failures in real time. Number 6. Costello never truly trusts anyone. Even Frank Costello's closest associates are tested, surveilled, or threatened throughout the film. His paranoia isn't a character flaw, it's a survival strategy embedded so deeply it becomes instinct. Scorsese directed Nicholson to maintain suspicion, even in moments of apparent warmth, channeling the actor's unpredictability from The Shining while grounding it in Boston mob boss Whitey Bulger's documented distrust of associates. The character operates on the assumption that betrayal is inevitable, that loyalty is temporary, and that control requires constant vigilance, mirroring how real FBI informant relationships deteriorated during the RICO prosecutions of the 1990s. He promotes him, relies on him, and still watches him with the detached calculation of someone preparing for inevitable disappointment. Control requires isolation, and the film shows that isolation functioning as both weapon and prison. Number 7. Billy's therapist is a moral mirror. Madeline Madden hears both sides of the same story without knowing it, listening to Billy and Colin describe their struggles, their fears, and their fractured identities through entirely different lenses. Scorsese positioned Vera Farmiga's character as the audience's proxy, functioning like the psychiatrist's scenes in Alfred Hitchcock's Spellbound, where therapy becomes confession. Neither version is healthy. Both men use her as a confessor, therapist, and emotional anchor, while hiding the truths that would make her understanding possible. Madeline becomes a mirror that reflects both men's brokenness back at them, and neither one can stand what they see. The film suggests that healing is impossible when identity itself is a lie, echoing the fractured psychotherapy dynamics R.D. Laing explored in his writings on divided selves. Number 8. Elevators signal death. Every major turning point in The Departed happens near or inside an elevator. Transitional spaces that exist between floors, between safety and exposure, between life and the end of it. Scorsese used elevators as visual metaphors for vulnerability, borrowing the claustrophobic elevator tension Brian De Palma perfected in Carlito's Way. The Crown Roast restaurant elevator, the police headquarters elevator, and the final apartment building elevator all become execution chambers where movement equals death. Zaya designed the elevator interiors to feel claustrophobic and fluorescent, filmed primarily in functional elevators inside Boston's Government Center, where actual Massachusetts state police officers pass through daily. In The Departed, elevators don't transport, they deliver people to consequences they can't outrun. The doors open and fate walks in. Number 9. Colin is always framed with reflections. Glass, mirrors, and windows dominate Matt Damon's shots throughout the film, constantly doubling, fracturing, or partially obscuring his image. Ballhaus used reflective surfaces to visually represent Colin's fractured identity, employing techniques he'd learned shooting Fassbinder's The Marriage of Maria Braun in 1979. The technique becomes more pronounced as the film progresses, and Colin's control begins slipping. By the final act, filmed extensively inside Boston's glass-walled financial towers along Atlantic Avenue, he's almost never shot without some form of visual multiplication. Scorsese said the reflections were meant to show that Colin doesn't have an authentic self to return to, mirroring the identity crisis themes Jean-Luc Godard explored through fragmented reflections in French New Wave cinema. He's an image, not a person, and the cinematography enforces that emptiness in every frame. Number 10. Billy never finishes a sentence. Throughout the film, Billy's dialogue trails off, overlaps, or gets interrupted by other characters, external noise, or his own inability to articulate what he's feeling. Scorsese and screenwriter William Monahan, adapting the Hong Kong film Infernal Affairs while grounding it in Boston Irish-American culture, deliberately wrote Billy's lines to feel incomplete, mirroring his fractured identity. DiCaprio embraced the fragmentation, drawing on method acting techniques he'd refined working with Daniel Day-Lewis on Gangs of New York. An identity without resolution can't stabilize, echoing the verbal breakdown Robert De Niro demonstrated in Taxi Driver when isolation destroys coherent communication. He's never allowed to finish because the life he's living doesn't have an ending, just surveillance and performance stretching toward inevitable collapse. Number 11. Police meetings are always disorganized. Cross-talk, interruptions, raised voices, and overlapping dialogue dominate every scene inside the Massachusetts State Police headquarters. Scorsese filmed the meetings with documentary-style chaos, letting actors talk over each other and allowing confusion to build organically rather than through scripted disorder. The technique came from his experience filming Mean Streets and Goodfellas, where institutional scenes felt more real when they reflected actual bureaucratic breakdown. The law enforcement scenes feel chaotic by design, filmed inside Boston's actual state police offices, where jurisdictional conflicts between agencies mirror the on-screen chaos. Alec Baldwin, Mark Wahlberg, and Martin Sheen improvised much of the overlapping dialogue, using techniques Sidney Lumet pioneered in ensemble police dramas like Serpico and Prince of the City. The system fails before it even encounters criminals. Internal collapse precedes external defeat. Number 12. Costello's rat story is literal. Frank Costello's obsession with rats, with betrayal, with the image of vermin destroying structures from within isn't philosophical meditation, it's projection. He knows exactly what he is because he's built his entire empire on being the thing he claims to despise. Scorsese used the rat imagery throughout the film, culminating in the literal rat that appears in the final shot, making the metaphor unavoidably explicit in a way that recalled the blunt symbolism Coppola employed with oranges in the Godfather trilogy. Costello's monologues about loyalty and betrayal function as confession disguised as warning, grounded in the real history of Whitey Bulger's FBI informant activities that destroyed Boston's Irish mob from within during the 1980s. He hates rats because he sees himself in them. Number 13, authority is always corrupt or compromised. Police officers, politicians, and institutional figures fail repeatedly throughout the film, either through incompetence, corruption, or paralysis in the face of systemic rot. Scorsese deliberately avoided showing any authority figure as purely heroic or effective, reflecting the post-Enron corporate scandals and NSA surveillance revelations that defined mid-2000s American distrust of institutions. Captain Queenan dies because the system can't protect him. Captain Ellerby survives because he's willing to compromise. Politicians appear in Costello's pocket, filmed against the backdrop of Boston's political corruption scandals that had defined Massachusetts politics since the Bulger-Connolly FBI scandal broke in the 1990s. No system offers protection or justice. Only individuals pay the price, while institutions survive intact. Number 14, Colin's apartment is emotionally empty. Clean lines, minimal decoration, expensive furniture, and no personal warmth define Colin Sullivan's living space. Zaya designed the apartment to look like a showroom, drawing visual inspiration from the sterile modernist interiors featured in American Psycho's depiction of 1980s Manhattan excess. Nothing feels touched, used, or genuinely chosen. The sterility reflects Colin's internal emptiness. Filmed inside Boston's luxury Beacon Hill condominiums where old money and new wealth intersect, Scorsese wanted the apartment to feel aspirational and suffocating simultaneously, the kind of place that appears in Architectural Digest but never feels like home. Colin's life looks perfect from outside and offers nothing inside. Success without identity looks sterile, recalling the emotionally vacant domestic spaces Stanley Kubrick captured in Eyes Wide Shut, and nothing in Colin's apartment suggests anyone actually lives there. Number 15, Billy dies without being heard. Billy Costigan never gets to explain himself, never achieves the moment of vindication where his truth is finally acknowledged by the people who sent him into hell. The information he carried, the evidence he gathered, the identity he sacrificed, all die with him in an elevator before truth can matter. Scorsese refused to give Billy a hero's death or a meaningful final statement, subverting the cathartic justice audiences expected after decades of police procedurals promising resolution. DiCaprio said the abrupt execution was the hardest scene to film, shot in a single shocking take that recalled the sudden violence Scorsese had employed when Joe Pesci's character is executed without warning in Goodfellas. In The Departed, timing is justice, and Billy's timing was always wrong. Truth becomes irrelevant when it can't be heard. Number 16, the film never shows justice working. Arrests fail, trials never happen, and information leaks before consequences can arrive. The Departed refuses to reward morality or punish evil through institutional channels, showing instead that justice collapses under the weight of its own corruption. Scorsese structured the film to deny catharsis, to withhold the satisfying courtroom scenes or triumphant arrests that audiences expect from crime dramas. Criminals die, but not because the system caught them. Cops die, but not because they failed tactically. Everyone dies because the structures meant to contain violence are too broken to function, echoing the cynical view of American law enforcement David Mamet explored in Homicide. The system survives by allowing individuals to kill each other while pretending oversight still matters. Number 17, the final shot isn't about the rat. The literal rat that appears in the closing frames is obvious, a visual metaphor so direct it borders on comedic. But the real focus of the final shot is the city behind the window, Boston stretching across the frame unchanged, indifferent, continuing without pause despite the carnage that just concluded. Scorsese and Ballhaus framed the rat against the skyline deliberately, using the same distant urban perspective Woody Allen employed in Manhattan's opening montage. The city is the truth, filmed from Colin's apartment overlooking the actual Boston harbor where centuries of corruption have cycled through, generations without fundamentally altering the power structures. The final shot promises that the cycle will continue because the system that produces it remains untouched. Number 18, no one escapes their role. Every character who attempts to step outside their assigned identity dies. Billy tries to return to legitimacy and gets executed. Costello tries to maintain control and gets betrayed. Colin tries to escape his double life and faces consequences he can't manipulate away. Scorsese structured the film around the premise that performance is safety and authenticity is lethal, drawing on sociologist Irving Goffman's theories about social performance published in The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. The moment characters attempt genuine honesty or try to reconcile their fractured identities, violence arrives. Costigan, Sullivan, and Costello all die trying to become something other than what they were assigned to be. The roles survive, the people don't. Number 19, the film ends where it began. The Departed concludes with power structures untouched, with truth unresolved, and with silence occupying the space where justice should exist. Dignam executes Colin, but the execution doesn't restore order or punish corruption systemically. It's personal revenge disguised as righteousness. Scorsese brought the film full circle deliberately, showing that nothing fundamental changed despite all the violence. Filmed in the same South Boston neighborhoods where Whitey Bulger once operated with impunity under FBI protection. The ending delivers exactly that. Boston continues, criminals replace criminals, cops replace cops, refusing the redemptive closure that defined Scorsese's earlier crime films like Casino and Goodfellas. It just stops, leaving audiences in the same moral wilderness where it began. The Departed isn't about good versus evil or cops versus criminals. It's about who controls the narrative when everyone is performing and no one is seen. Scorsese built a film where every character is trapped between who they are and who they're pretending to be, where surveillance replaces trust and institutions survive by sacrificing the individuals they claim to protect. Which hidden detail changed how you see the film, and what movie should we dissect next?